Thanks very much. When Rob asked me to do this speech this morning, I was really very pleased, but also it's a real struggle for me because I'm constantly struggling to figure out what is it that you say. I mean, these days when you see what it is that's happening to our children. And so, I just have to sort of talk about these things the way I feel it. There are people here from Milwaukee. There's other people around here who probably heard me speak before. And although, as Dennis said, we are struggling in Milwaukee, and because we're struggling, there are severe differences of opinion about what should happen or not happen. And so, I represent, one viewpoint, but there are a lot of people who don't believe in some of the things that I think ought to be done. And in a way, it's a positive thing that there's debate in Milwaukee, because I've been in communities where there is no debate. And that's worse, because it means that people have given up. At least we still feel that there's a chance, and we're going to fight over what's the best road to go, for our children. So, I really do appreciate this opportunity to be here. I want to give thanks to 3 schools that are in the network that I've been in. I can't say CVS anymore, so it's Chicago Vocational Career Academy, Turner Tech, and the St. Louis Career Academy. 3 places that I've been in. And I just want to say thanks to the people in those schools who were really nice to me for the time that I was able to spend there. And I learned something in each one of those places. But let me try to just lay this out to you all. When I was superintendent, I was often asked, what is it that you want for your kids? And I looked at all 100,000 of these kids as mine. That's how I approached them. They all belong to me. And so my view was that there were 4 things that I wanted for my kids. Number 1, when they graduated, I wanted them to be able to go to college or some post-secondary experience if that's what they wanted. But I wanted them to be able to do it without having to spend their first year in remedial education. I thought it wasn't asking too much that when our kids leave these school systems and they want to go to college, why do they have to spend their first year in something that ain't college? And so the idea was, hey, I want them to be able to go into 201, not 001X. And so that was the first thing. The second thing is for those kids who did not want to go to college and wanted to go directly into a job, I wanted them to have the ability and the attitude to get an entry-level job that provided some hope for the future. But I believe that irrespective of which one of those directions they went, that you still had to have the same rigorous foundation. That the idea that, like this dude told Malcolm, you people are good with your hands, and so you all can be carpenters. This idea to me is a false idea, and it's an indication of a level of oppression that remains with us today. And so my view was that if we were going to talk about school of work, it wasn't about tracking. It was about saying, irrespective of which way you're going, you all got to be prepared to go in different directions in your life. And so you need the same rigorous foundation. The third point was that I wanted some of my kids, at least, to have an entrepreneurial spirit. I didn't want them going out there thinking that somebody gonna give you a job. I wanted them to go out thinking that, hey, maybe I got to create wealth for myself and for my community. And so I wanted people to have this entrepreneurial spirit, to not be risk adverse, as many of us as educators are. And so I wanted them to have that kind of attitude. And then the final thing is, irrespective of which direction they went, I wanted all of them to be prepared to engage in the practice of freedom. Paulo Freire, in his book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, in the foreword of that book, Richard Shaw said there is no such thing as a neutral educational process. That education functions either as an instrument which is used to facilitate the integration of the younger generation into the logic of the present system and bring about conformity to it, or becomes, quote, the practice of freedom, the means by which men and women learn how to deal critically and creatively with their reality and participate in the transformation of their world. And so my view is that for our kids, they're going to have to learn how to fight. Because if you poor and you not white in America, you're going to have to fight. That's the bottom line. And so the idea is I want the kids ready and able to fight, to ask questions, to be a part of transforming their world. Now, I think in order to do this, to help our kids be prepared to engage in the practice of freedom, I think we have to fundamentally and radically change the way we approach educating our children. And I assume that almost all of you are here today because you believe that the way that we're doing this stuff needs to be changed. But as I go around the country, the interesting thing that I've learned is a whole lot of people support change as long as nothing changes. You know what I'm saying? We all about, I'm all for change and everything, as long as it don't affect me. As long as I really don't have to do nothing different. And so what I've decided to do is, because sometimes even in these conferences, people come here and they get liberated by discussing change. It's not that you don't change nothing when you go back. It's just that you sitting up in here pontificating and it's safe and hell, you figure you done changed something because you were in the discussion. You know, and I'm going to form all around the country clubs that are called Leap Before You Look groups. Because I concluded that if you look too long, you will never leap. And that there are always people out there who come to you talking about, hey, I'm all for this change, but I got 100 questions that have to be answered before I'm ready to go with you. These people are not for change, they're blockers. Because all of you know that if you're going to get involved in change, you cannot answer every question prior to the change taking place. And that the change itself creates new conditions and new problems that can only be answered in the process of the change itself. So that if you leap, then what will happen is the urgency of finding answers to these questions become more apparent. So that this change thing is hard. And those of you who know it and who are involved in it, and even some of you all who are in good schools where you see progress, every day you know it could be taken back. And so this process is constant. And so as I've traveled the country over the past few years, I've talked to and listened to and been hollered at by educators and researchers and union members and policy analysts and parents and students. And many of these people argue that our public education system is fundamentally doing its job. And even when they admit that there are, quote, some problems, they still argue that these problems are not indicators that the system is broken. And so in responding to these assertions, I make the following argument. Number one, that the current approaches and power arrangements in our systems of K-12 education work well for a significant number of our children. They do well on various forms of assessment. Their schooling gives them pathways to participation in mainstream America. Their parents are involved, happy, and empowered. Their school environments, physically and mentally, are structured in ways that respect them and their communities, and there's an underlying assumption that the school had better produce or drastic changes will be made. On the other hand, there are a significant number of our children, particularly children living in urban areas like Philadelphia and Chicago and New York and Miami and Milwaukee and Detroit and Oakland, San Francisco, and on and on and on, where most of our poorest non-white children live, for whom the current system does not work well at all. They don't do well on various forms of assessment. Their schooling gives them pathways to the lowest rung of America's ladder of success. Their parents are unhappy, uninvolved, and unempowered. Their school environments, physically and mentally, are structured in ways that devalue them as persons and are contemptuous of the communities from which they come. And when these kids don't learn, they and their families are blamed. And it's like what Betty was talking about yesterday. You have these people come up to you and say, well, we could do a much better job if we just had better children. You know, it's like the parents send us their worst children. They got their best children at home, waiting to see how we do with their worst children. And if we do okay with them, then they will send us their best children. These parents send us the best kids they got. But if you listen closely, those people who believe that the issue is the families, they always start out talking about how poor these kids are. You know they come from dysfunctional families. You know they come from these poor homes. And we got all this litany of stuff, which is our way of rationalizing our inability to teach them. And see, I believe, like Mortimer Adler, there are no unteachable kids. There are only adults who haven't figured out how to reach it. And then finally, there's a clear understanding that whether the school produces or not, little or nothing will happen to the adults who are responsible for their learning. And so the old "my check is gonna come, whether you learn or not," is the prevalent attitude. And we still got teachers out there to this day telling kids that in these classrooms. And you know what it is? It's like when I used to visit schools. You know how you go into a classroom where learning is taking place? And you can just see it. You can just feel it. And you go in there and you just, you're excited. Because you know it's happening. And then you walk out of that classroom and walk right next door to death. And everybody in the building know where the dying is going on. Everybody knows who's killing our kids. But we don't become like the police. It's the silence. You can't tell on your colleagues. It's the principal's job. It's the AP's job. It's the superintendent's job. It's the board's job. It's not our job to say, out of here. No, because I'm going to close my door and I'm going to, quote, do my thing. Even though I know some other kids are dying over there next door with these fools who should not be with our children. And so, to me, I just have to be, I'm going to fight to say that we have to have a system that truly empowers parents, that allows dollars to follow students, and that hold adults accountable for student achievement, and that alters the power arrangements that are the foundation for the existing system. Because I believe what is required is a totally restructured governance and financial system, one that would support a system of learning opportunities instead of our current school system. And the person who first got me thinking about this was Tyak in his book, One Best System. And I started reading that, and I've talked to him, and I know I've gone further than maybe what he was talking about. But, to me, we just gotta explode this paradigm. And then what we gotta create is a quote system that will incorporate, say, like new configurations of the existing system, where instead of geographic districts, maybe we could have collaborations in large districts where 10 or 15 schools get together and they unite around an idea about kids. And they start trying to figure out how better to do that. We need public-private partnerships. We need cyber schools, home schools, true charter schools, multi-site learning opportunities, virtual schools. We need to explode this thing that is static, non-dynamic, and has us trapped along with the kids. And so it's hard to conceptualize that because we all start from our frame of reference about school. And you know, the interesting thing is about school, and I found this out when I was a superintendent, is that everybody knows what you're supposed to be doing, because everybody went to school. And people would stop you. You know, oh, you ought to be doing. When I was in school 30 years ago, and I listened patiently, and finally I said one day to a man who was just on me, I was at the end of my day that day. And this dude was all over me about what had happened 40 years ago. And honest God, I said, excuse me. I said, you know what? This is very interesting, but it's irrelevant. Because this ain't 40 years ago. And a lot of stuff they did to you, they probably shouldn't have been doing 40 years ago. But the one thing we do know, that this is not 40 years ago, this is today. And it's like we approach these kids who are part of a hip-hop generation with like a waltz mentality, and we're trying to figure out why it don't work. And so, I mean, I just concluded this has to change. And I think there's a lot of things that we have to do. I mean, I support vouchers, I support charters, but I support a whole lot of other things, because I don't think that there's any one thing that's all of a sudden going to make this better. So I think there's a lot of things we have to do. One of them, for example, is, and I think we have to all have the highest expectations for all of our children. But you know, educators, you know, we're a smart group. We know how to absorb the rhetoric. So if you ask educators today, most of them will say, oh yes, we have to have high expectations for all our children. And then all our children can learn. Most of them will say that. But then ask them, well, can all of our children take algebra? Then you get the hemming and the hawing. Some of them can, but of course some of these kids are just not prepared to do this higher level of work. Which one of these kids are you talking about? And what is it that makes them unable to do this higher level of work? How is it that we can point to the sky for these kids, but look to the ground when it really comes to what we think they can do? And so you gotta have high expectations. If you're gonna have high expectations in America, you gotta deal with issues of race and class. I mean, all these people who run around here talking about this is a colorblind society. What world do you live in? I mean, it's like people look at me and say, well, Howard, I don't see a black man. When somebody say that to you, I get scared. What is it that you see? I mean, see, because the issue isn't that you see me as a black man. The issue is what difference does it make to you? But don't neuter me. I mean, and so, yes, our kids have to deal with the reality of not being white in America, or being poor in America. Being poor in America has a direct impact on your life chances. We can't act like that's not real. But the question is, we know that to be true. What things then do we have to do to make sure that our kids learn in spite of that? What is it that we do? And so we have to have these expectations. And I go even further, and some of you heard me say this, I think we need people with our kids who love our children. Who love our children. And Marianne Williamson, in her book, Return to Love, she talks about the fable of the frog and the princess, and how the princess kisses the frog and turns the frog into a prince. And she says what this fable is really about is the miraculous power of love to create the conditions for transformation. And that if you do not love people, you cannot understand them. And if you can't understand them, then you can't reach them. And if you can't reach them, how in the world do you think that you can teach them? And so people say to me, well, you don't go too far now. Are you telling me I gotta love these kids like I do my husband and my wife or my significant other? And my response to that is I don't know. Because I don't know how you love your husband or your wife or your significant other. But the reality of it is, it's not that kind of love anyway. It's not romantic love, it's agape. It's unredeeming love expecting nothing in return. I mean, that's the love that we have to bring to these kids. And that's hard. But if we care deeply for these kids, if we expect a lot from these kids, if we're willing to see them as they are, and to take them from where they are to where they need to be, we can do this. I talked about rigorous curriculum. I talked about algebra. I mean, algebra is an interesting course. Because when I used to go around, or interesting subject, when I used to go around, we have kids in math for life. Math for how to get to the supermarket. Living skills is what we call them. Life skill math. What the heck? I mean, what is life skill math going to do? And when you talk to any of these teachers, do they have their children in life skills math? No, they got their kids in algebra. Because they know that algebra is a gatekeeping course in America. You don't go to college in America taking life skills. And it's not even about the math, it's about problem solving. It's about saying to our kids that in order to make it in this world, this is what you're going to have to do. And I'm willing to work with you and work with you and work with you, but I am unwilling to say that this is not what you have to do. I mean, if we're not going to do that for kids, then why bother? And I believe this. And it goes further. I mean, it's about even how we deliver education. I mean, we're still in this 2x4, by 6, by 9, by 12 paradigm. This idea that all learning takes place based upon what's between the two covers of a textbook. That you can do it within the four walls of a classroom in a high school with 6 evenly spaced periods throughout the day, and then in 9 months and 12 years you educated as a bankrupt industrial age paradigm. But yet many of us are holding on to it. We're just holding on to it. That somehow it's going to happen. We got people teaching kids they wish were there. Kids that used to be there, but not the kids who are actually there. And we got to find different ways of delivering instruction to these kids that we say we care so much about. And that's what I like about Turner and Chicago Vocational Career Academy and St. Louis. I mean, it's not, they're not perfect places, but they're places that are struggling to figure out a better way to deliver this instruction to kids. They're trying to get out of the box, even as the school district keeps trying to drag them back into the box. And so it's like, but you gotta have that. I mean, we gotta have, I mean, it's things like, why are multiple intelligences important? So when Howard Gardner wrote about this in Mirrors of the Mind, I mean, to me, what he was saying was, the question is not how intelligent are you, the question is, how are you intelligent? Because the real issue for our kids is they're all intelligent. We just have to find out where it is. But if you have a linear way of looking at our children, you'll never find it. And then even those of us who say we believe in multiple intelligence, we done twisted and turned that around. Because I don't remember him saying that if you have a real skill here, that what we should do is only concentrate on that. What I thought he was saying was you find the strength in order to get to the weakness. You don't find the strength to say, oh, y'all good in music, so you don't need to learn how to write. Or you're good at talking, so you don't need how to write. You can write, so you don't need to know how to talk. I thought it was, let me use writing, which is your strength, to help you talk. You can talk, let me use how you talk to help you write. So that it's taking that strength and going at the weakness. But it is this book that Stevenson wrote called A Learning Gap. And he was talking about the difference between American teachers and Japanese teachers. And he was just saying that Japanese teachers spend more time in school than American teachers, but they teach less. Because they've discovered that if you want people to improve their practice, you actually have to give them some time every day to reflect and to work with each other on improving their practice. And that there's this study that was done called Prisoners of Time. Another one of these great studies that was done that we all ignored, where they said over and over again that if we keep people trapped in the current schedule, the current day, the current school year, that we'll never be able to figure out a way to give teachers enough time to learn how to do things differently. Think about how we do in-service in America. I mean, let's say you're at a school, you got 40 teachers in the school. 2 teachers get to go somewhere where they're gonna learn some dynamic. The way the 38 know the 2 went is that either you got subs in the building or somebody got to take the classes. So the 2 go away and they learn something that's phenomenal that would really help kids. They come back, there's not enough time for them to share anything with their colleagues. And then they go in the classroom, and no matter how wonderful it was at that place that they were in, when they get into that classroom with real kids, something goes wrong. And since there's nobody in the class with them to help them out when it goes wrong, what do? They go back to what they know, even though what they know don't work. I mean, but it's how we do professional development. And we all gotta have professional development, because you can't get better without constantly working to improve yourself. But the models that we use won't work for most adults. Because the reality of change in schools is not only learning about how kids learn, it's also learning about how adults learn. And what has to be done to work with adults, although we do know there's some of them that you can't work with. There's some of them you can professional develop them until they leave here. And ain't nothing happening. And those are the ones that we need to encourage to be in a different profession. But for most people who are out there trying every day, and I've seen teachers doing heroic things, what they need is help. And so we have to talk about how do we do all of these kinds of things simultaneously. There's a lot more, but I'm going to just leave it there and try to end this. Let me just say, though, in the end, I don't think we're ever going to get the depth of change that we need unless we're prepared to really hold people accountable for student achievement. And I was reading this book Chuck Finn wrote called We Must Take Charge. And the thing I liked about it was he talked about, what do you mean by accountability? And he said there was really 3 things. Number 1, you have to have some clear standards about where is it you're trying to go to. What are our goals for our kids? What do we think they ought to learn? And we can debate that. But in the end, you got to have some idea about here's the standards that we're setting. And then there's got to be a way to assess whether or not those standards are being met. And then we have to find a way to inform teachers in a timely manner about what happened. And these are all difficult issues, because the assessment issues are difficult. I mean, Patricia McNeil talked about standardized tests. And all of us in this room can argue about how terrible they are. But right now, standardized tests have a real impact on kids' life chances. And one way or another, even as we struggle to say they're not relevant, we got to figure out a way to help kids do as well as they possibly can on them, because they still impact on what happens to these kids. And so we have to develop authentic measures at the same time, and I know it's difficult that we try to deal with this. But that's the world in which we live. But in the end, the third thing about an accountability system is that there has to be consequences. And right now, the only consequences for bad education is on the children. they're the ones who face the impact of that. For most of us as adults, we all know that whether a single child learns or not in a school, next year there's going to be a new group of kids sent over there. And you know what's so hypocritical about America and a lot of us? And I do support choice. I'm just being frank about that. I mean, I have. But see, I never thought that choice was the issue in America. I thought the issue was who hasn't. Because, you know, people with money, that's all, those of us in this room, we're taking care of our kids. Everybody know that. And then if you got money in America, you're going to find a place for your child. The issue is, what about these poor people who don't have the resources? And what about this? What about when you go into a school and you ask a person who teaches in that school, would you put your child in this school? And if the answer is no, well, why in the hell would anybody's children be in this school? If it ain't good enough for your child, why is it good enough for these other children who are up in here? How? Anyway, there are, I mean, I just have to, because what we're doing is that, it's like when I visited schools, I would always ask the question, would I want my own child? Over and over again, I'd ask myself that. Because that to me was an important issue. So what I'm saying is that we have to have systems that make it clear that we will make drastic changes if over and over again kids continue not to learn in these environments. We've got to be prepared to close some of these places. I tell you, I just wanted to like close one of the places and put a sign up under new manager. I mean, it wasn't, because the way we do it is we kick the kids out. Well, we need it and leave the adults. We got adults who got squatters' rights to buildings. You know, I've been in here 20 years with my arms folded. You know, we ain't going nowhere. We ain't done nothing with these kids, but hell, this building belongs to us. We got rights. What about the rights of these kids? When do their rights surface in the rights debate in America? So there are no silver bullets out there. And I applaud those of you who are here, who are trying, who are pushing the envelope, who are fighting for these kids. And I've been in places where I know after years of fighting, people are tiring. They're not tiring because of what they're doing with kids. They're tiring because of what the adults continue to put in the way of trying to do what's right for kids. I mean, you find a school that's working and a district looks over there and says, hell, that school's working. What are they doing? The answer isn't what could we now do in the rest of the schools. The answer is we got to stop them from doing what they're doing. They got a 7-hour planning period. The rest of the schools don't have that. We can't have that. You got this, the rest of the schools don't have that. Blah, blah, blah. We got to fight not to be dragged back in to the stuff that you know don't work. And so this fight is going to have to be all over the place. And I would say to you that those of you who are inside a system fighting, you have a hell of a lot more leverage if there's some outside forces that are fighting as well. And instead of seeing this as an enemy issue, you need to begin to see it as how do we unite with those people who are on the outside fighting to help me create a better condition on the inside. So what I would say is I love those of you who are continuing the fight. I encourage those of you who are out there fighting, those who come to this conference to try to figure out, do I want to do this? Or can I find a way to do it? You can, but be prepared for the long haul. And what I would try to suggest to you is that the attitude you ought to pursue it with is one that William Daggett had. And this stays with me. He said that we must love our children's hopes and dreams and aspirations and prayers more than we love the institutional heritage of the school system. Thank you very much.